ladies. So, as we are kind of working toward the close of this final week in our study, I want to talk a little bit about our priorities. So, the importance of setting them and keeping them focused and remembering what we've learned. Specifically, remembering about the importance of taking the things that are hard to God first. And I'll give you some examples just from my story, our story. I guess it's not just mine because, it affects our whole family. In the beginning, I shared some of the things that I specifically prayed over Bud for, about his work, about the desire to provide for a family, about becoming a godly father, and just some of those things that were part of our struggles. There was an underlying theme that just came up over and over again. And I sat through a sermon where I was so convicted just to the core of who I was. And the pastor taught out of 1 Peter 5. Okay, and so I'm going to pick it up at the end of verse 5 in 1 Peter 5, and it says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your cares upon him, because he cares for you. And he went on for the better part of 20 minutes, convincing us that God really cares about the things that we care about, even the things that seem small and insignificant in the greater scheme of things and how they are important to us. They are, in fact, important to the God who loves us. And I had been wrestling with this, I'm taking everything to God first instead of to my husband, instead of to my girlfriends, even instead of to my mentor, who was just a godly woman in my world through this hard time. And today, now I call her friends. But I thought, I'm burdening God with all of these things, and he's listening to me. And the thing is, I hadn't quite bought into the idea that by taking these things to God, he was fighting for me. He was standing up over me in this hard time, and even just about the things that were not horrible. Not the things that were abusive or, just some of the bad things I know that are in this group. I just struggled with that. Do you ever struggle with those kind of things, like taking the little things to God and wanting him to work on your behalf and thinking, there's so many bigger problems in the world. Is this really what I should take to God? And I just want to encourage you to persevere in this. And so one of the underlying things that really drives a struggle in our home is that my husband is a negative person. I'm going to put it as respectfully and honoring as I can. He has the ability to take a situation and work it out to its final, the world is ending kind of conclusion. Okay, that is just his personality. And he does it in a way that is almost infectious to the rest of the house. It gets into my spirit. I can get so down and depressed and just struggling with it. And I personally struggle with anxiety. It is something I have dealt with since I was a very young girl. And so you pair those things together, and this house can be one of the most tormenting places to step foot inside at times. And so I began looking for scriptures about that, because I know that kind of attitude is not a godly attitude. Well, what if I can begin to pray over him about this, and pray also that God would help me not to take that on as much, to help me to stay firm in my hopefulness and in my joyfulness. And I found this verse, and I just grabbed it off the bathroom mirror because that's where I put things. The bathroom is kind of my hideaway when the world gets a little crazy or my people get a little loud, obnoxious, you know how little people can be. And I kind of take my own personal mommy time out in the bathroom. And so I write my verses out on just note cards. I'm just plain Jane that way. I know you can get printables and all kinds of frilly, fancy things, but this just works for me. And so I found Philippians 2, verses 14 through 15. And I had committed to not put this where he could find it. Like, it wasn't intentional for him to see it. And he doesn't pay any attention to the verses I put up in the mirror. I committed to not beat him over the head with my Bible knowledge. I don't, preach at him. I don't tell him what he ought to do. I'm trying to practice what I preach, that I'm letting him lead and letting God work on him. But I'm praying for the things that God will work on for him, to get my drift. So this verse says, do all things without grumbling or complaining, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. And I thought, whoa, that is a verse I can claim and pray over my husband in this struggle of his. And I'm here to tell you, I didn't tell him I was praying it. I did put it, I think at first I had put it up on my dresser specifically so he wouldn't see it, because he never looks there. And I had been praying it for months, just praying that God would help him to not be a man who grumbles or complains, to help him be blameless and pure. And he had set a meeting to talk with our pastor about something. And he came home with a stack of laminated cards, like business card size. And he's like, I'm going to try having scriptures out to work on the things that I'm struggling with. And do you know what? This verse was in his stack of cards. He said, have you ever seen this verse? Man, I grumble and complain a lot. I'm going to work on memorizing this verse. And it was one of the first moments where I bought into the reality that my God cares about the things that I care about. He cares about them, and he honors my humility, right? He's opposed to the proud, and it says he gives grace to the humble. And he has begun to work this particular character trait out of my husband. He's created an atmosphere in our home where we can talk about it. When he comes in just like a garbage truck full of negativity and criticism and starts to just dump that on me, we have been able now to have conversations about, hey, honey, I'm really having a tough time with all of that. I hear you, and I know you need to talk about it. Have you talked to God about this first? And then let's talk about it after. And so I want to encourage you with this, that God has this amazing way of working it out without the need for my mouth when I am powerfully, strategically praying over my husband. And this video might be a little bit long. I'm going to share two more things that were just like, wow, God. Do you ever have like a, wow, God, you did this kind of moments? So I think I mentioned in one of the lessons that I babysit these two precious little blessings, and we have a house that is just set up in a particular way. When it rains, the rain kind of like comes as a waterfall over our front porch from our gutters, and he's tried to fix it, and it's just embarrassing. It's frustrating, and it's one, again, of those little things that I care about. I don't want these precious little children to be soaking wet on the mornings that it's raining cats and dogs as they come into my home. I don't want their mom soaking wet as she's having to go back out to work from that. And I just, honestly, I just keep a list, and once a week I just kind of pray about those things that are important in my life, and the rest of the week I kind of pray about the other things. That's kind of how I've structured that But I had been praying about it in the morning, literally had just put it on my list. And we were in the car driving to our life group, which is our small group Bible study, which is in a home. Our church does home groups instead of Sunday school. They do Sunday school too, but the home groups are our choice because they're more intimate. We feel like half the point, squirrel. As we were driving there, it had been raining that morning, which is why it got added to my list. And my husband just kind of turned to me in the car and he said, I've been thinking a lot about the way that the rain kind of waterfalls out of our gutters, and I'm trying to think about how to fix that. I just want you to know, I know that's embarrassing. I know that's not something that you really want going on. I'm not sure if I know how to fix it, but I'm going to be looking into that. And maybe we can extend the porch so that even if it does waterfall, it won't do it right as they come up. Or, do you know what I mean? He began to talk to me about ideas about how to fix it. And I just sat in the car, like almost in tears, because God had heard my heart about that. I had not said a word to him about it. He isn't even there to see it happen. He's already gone to work by the time she is dropping off these precious little blessings. And it isn't fixed yet, okay? So hear me, we're not quite to that point yet, but it does come up again. It is already on his radar, something that I care about that doesn't affect him. He, really doesn't need to have that in his mind, except that God heard my heart and put it in his heart to do something that would show love to me. One word, okay? This one just gets me like crazy gets me every time I think about it. I love to garden. It is so, I don't know, as a stay-at-home mom, I don't get to see a whole lot of results in life. Do you know what I mean? Like the laundry, I might get the laundry done, but then the laundry is going to be built back up to do again, tomorrow. Maybe even as soon as I get it folded and put it away, I will find another pile of clothes under somebody's bed. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't get to see a lot of results and things, but gardening I do. Like, I plant the seed, I water the seed, I weed the garden, I spend time in there, and then, as we get close to fall, we have all this beautiful produce. It's just such a satisfying hobby of mine. But we live in a house where the backyard is just dominated by trees. Those trees own the real estate in our backyard. There is not a square foot of that backyard that is not deeply entrenched by tree roots. And so after we moved in and we realized we couldn't put a garden in the backyard, it wouldn't work. And not to mention the trees, have this beautiful full leaf coverage, and so it wouldn't even get sunlight. And we started with a small garden in the front yard. And at first it was a small garden because it was, we weren't sure about a whole lot of things. And anyway, over the years it got to be big. And we talked about last week about respect and the things that we find respectful or disrespectful and how they're different. Well, one of the things that came up when I asked my husband point blank, what is it that you see as disrespectful? One of the things that came up was that it embarrassed him to have a garden in the front yard. I mean, at that point, our front yard was mostly garden. There wasn't much grass, it just had gotten that big and was a lot of fun for me. And I don't particularly care what the neighbors think or what the life group thinks if they come to our house. But I learned he did. It embarrassed him. And he had begun to resent the garden, to resent my time as I was spending it there. And as I heard him and began to pray about it, there was a period of time where I was grieving the loss of that garden. And hold on a second. I need you to go in the other room. Thank you. And as I kind of grieved that and prayed over how could I show my husband love, this was in a period of time where we were just struggling. And I felt this, you just feel this whisper, okay, maybe for this season, you should give up your garden. I don't know. Do you ever hear God's voice that way? Just saying something to you that you don't want to hear. I didn't want to hear. But I wanted to be reaching with both hands for my desire instead of destroying what I desired with my preference. I don't have to have a garden. I want a garden. I love to garden. But what I desire deeply is for my husband to feel like he is leaving our home, for my husband to be proud of our home, to be proud to invite others into our home, to be proud that I am his wife, to not resent any hobby or interest that I have because it somehow shows him anything other than love and respect and honor. And as I was working out how to show him this, I just felt that just still small voice that I needed to give up that garden for a season. And I am here to tell you that I cried over that thing. We were at the end of the season. I'd already, harvested everything, and I began one day just to say, okay, I believe this is what you're saying to me. Is it in the scripture, black and white, thou shalt not have a garden in the front yard? No. And my very good friends who I had talked with and asked to pray with me about having a willing heart to do it without any attitude, to do it in love, to just make this sacrifice for this season. Okay, I'm going to say for this season. They were just all indignant for me, and I love them. Oh, how I love my friends, my good godly friends who would say, I don't know that this is a biblical thing. I don't, but I'll be praying for you. If this is what you feel like God wants you to do, I'm going to support you. And they did. And I, with the confidence that they were praying for me, and I was just going to do what I felt like God said to do because he had been faithful and continued to be faithful. And I went out. I had not told him. I just began to pull up the stakes to the little chicken wire we had to keep it safe from the dogs and the kids, and to pull things up and put them, in a right way, and to prepare the front yard to be a front yard again. And he came home from work that day, and I told him of what I had felt like, and I just shared my heart with him that this was his home too, and I didn't want him to ever be embarrassed that this was his home. And yes, I love to garden, and I would so long to do that in the future, but that I want to do it in a way that is respectful of his preferences and his feelings as well. And that maybe, in the future, there would be a way to do that. And he just kind of looked at me, right? There's no immediate response. And I'm like, okay, God, why did you tell me to do this? Was this you? That second guessing. And, man, I just let it be for a couple of days, and he came to me, and this is kind of how he is. He processes things and then comes back later. And he came back and he said, thank you. Thank you for hearing me. He said, what do you think about if I made you a raised bed in the backyard? He said, I've been looking on Google. Thank you, Google. He said, and I think if we raised it, if I built up a frame in the backyard, and there's this little corner about a foot, then the roots wouldn't affect it, and I could build you a garden there. In the years that we've been married, that man has never volunteered to build me anything, stepped up to fix anything, offered to care about anything I cared about. But through this process of taking my cares to God first, God was stirring in my husband a desire to show love to me in a way that I understood love. This is just one example. And do you know what? So interestingly, in the spring of the following year, I began to have bursitis and tendonitis throughout my hands and my knees. And I sat there in the doctor's office as she said, you know, what are your hobbies? You're probably going to have to set them aside for a year and let your body heal. I said, well, I love to write and I love to garden. And she said, oh, you're not going to be able to garden this year. I thought, timing. Do you know what I mean? Like just God's timing, that I couldn't have done it anyway. And in this way, because I surrendered to him before this, there wasn't that grief and that frustration that would have been there before. And I was able to do it as an act of love and service to my husband. I don't know. I just felt like just encouraging you today, whatever the things are that you are struggling with giving to God, that you're struggling with surrendering to God, I want to encourage your heart today to know that your God is crazy about you. He loves you with a love so much deeper and wider than you can even imagine, than I can even imagine this side of glory. And he cares deeply about the things that you care about, whether you think they're big things or little things, whatever it is you're struggling with, to surrender to him. Take that to him today. He cares for you. And no amount of nagging on my part, or asking or begging, or even we've talked about playful words and a feminine way to talk about things, none of that even would have stirred these things in my husband if I had not been bringing them to God first in prayer, and God changed my husband's heart. So much change at this point that I don't even recognize him some days. He is not the man I married almost 14 years ago. Praise God. He has worked miraculous change in his life and in my life. I am not that same girl either. And the result is this beautiful marriage where we still have a lot of hard days. We still have things we haven't gotten right. We are still actively working on the thing, but we're actively working on it with hope, because we've seen how God has worked, is working, will continue to work, right? He says, like, God is faithful to complete the thing that he began in us, and I believe him for that in my life, and I want you to believe it for your life and for your marriage. Sweet wife. Okay, ladies, I'll be back in a few minutes with some closing thoughts. Until then, be blessed.